The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for nearly a kilometer. Its walls were made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. 12 thrones sat in a half-circle, each one holding a representative from the elder species who ruled the galaxy. They had ruled for 10,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall like waves on an ocean. They feared nothing. Until humanity arrived. Admiral stood alone in the center of the hall. She was a small woman with hair and calm eyes. Her uniform was simple and dark. She carried no weapons. Behind her, visible through the massive windows, her fleet of 32 colony ships waited in orbit. Each ship held 50,000 humans. These were all the humans that remained in the galaxy. 1.6 million souls waiting to learn if they would live or die. High Arbiter of the Dominion rose from his throne. He was tall and thin, with skin like polished stone and eyes that glowed with cold blue light. His voice filled the hall without effort. Humanity stands accused of genetic instability. Your species evolves too quickly. You adapt to new environments within generations. You breed faster than any known species. You are a threat to galactic stability. Did not move. She had expected this. Humanity had only been part of galactic society for 200 years. In that time, they had spread to 40 worlds. They had learned technologies that other species took to master. They had made friends and enemies in equal measure, and they had made the elder species nervous. "We have done nothing wrong," said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "We have followed every law, we have honored every treaty, we have harmed no one." Another representative spoke. This one was from the hegemony. He was covered in thick fur the color of rust, and his teeth were sharp like knives. "That is not the point, human. You are not being punished for what you have done. You are being removed for what you might become. A weed does not need to strangle the garden today to be pulled out. It only needs to have the potential." Felt anger rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. Anger would not help her people. Only words could help now, and she had to choose them carefully. "And what is the judgment of this council?" she asked. Smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Exile, permanent and total. You will take your ships and leave conquered space. You will travel beyond the Shroud Nebula into the region known as the Dead Expanse. You will never return." A murmur went through the hall. Even some of the other representatives seemed surprised by this sentence. The Dead Expanse was not simply unexplored territory. It was a graveyard. Dozens of expeditions had entered it over the. None had ever returned. The stars there were old and dying. The planets were poison. Strange energy storms tore apart any ship that ventured too deep. Sending humanity to the Dead Expanse was not exile. It was murder. Slow, painful murder disguised as mercy. Closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her daughter, only 12 years old, waiting on one of the colony ships. She thought of the scientists and farmers and teachers and children who had put their faith in her to protect them. She thought of everything humanity had built and everything they had dreamed of becoming. Then she opened her eyes and bowed her head slightly. "We accept," she said. The hall went silent, even seemed surprised. He had expected begging, he had expected threats. He had prepared responses for both, but acceptance, simple, quiet acceptance, he did not know what to make of it. "You understand what you are agreeing to?" he asked. "I understand that you have given us no choice," replied. "I understand that if we refuse, your fleets will destroy us here and now. I understand that you believe you are sending us to our deaths." She paused. "But you do not know humanity as well as you think you do." Laughed. It was a cold sound like ice cracking. "And what do you think you can do in the Dead Expanse, human? There is nothing there, no habitable worlds, no resources, nothing but death." Looked up at him. Her eyes were not afraid. They were not angry. They were something else entirely, something that made laughter die in his throat. "You have given us nothing," she said. "We will make everything." She turned and walked out of the hall. She did not look back. She did not bow again. She simply walked with her head held high as if she were the one who had won this confrontation. The representatives watched her go in silence. Back on her flagship, the Eternal Hope gathered her captains in the command room. There were 32 of them, one for each colony ship. They were old and young, men and women, people who had served humanity all their lives. They looked at her with fear in their eyes. They had all heard the sentence. "It is decided," told them. "We leave within the hour, set course for the Shroud Nebula." Captain, a young man with quick eyes, stepped forward. "Admiral, there must be something we can do. We can fight. We can run to the outer territories. We can." "We can die," interrupted. "That is all the choices they have left us, Captain. Die here or die in the expanse." She paused. "But I choose to believe there is a third option." "What option?" asked Captain, an older woman with silver hair. Walked to the window and looked out at the fleet. 32 ships, 1.6 million humans, the last of their kind. "The option to live," she said. "The option to survive. The option to become something they cannot imagine. The dead expanse is unknown. Unknown is not the same as impossible. Every species in this galaxy looks at the darkness and sees death. But we are human. We look at the darkness and see a challenge." She turned back to her captains. "I will not lie to you. Many of us will die, perhaps most of us, perhaps all of us. But I would rather die reaching for something than live begging for scraps from those who despise us." The captains looked at each other. Then, one by one, they nodded. Captain was the first to speak. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Smiled. It was a real smile, warm and determined. "Tell our people the truth. Tell them what awaits us. Then tell them this: we are humanity. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars. We have crossed oceans and climbed mountains and reached for the stars. We will survive this too, not because it is easy, but because we refuse to do anything else." The fleet departed 6 hours later. The ships of the conquered watched them go, weapons ready to fire if they tried to turn back. But they did not turn back. They flew straight and true toward the Shroud Nebula, toward the darkness that had swallowed every expedition before them. On the viewing deck of the Eternal Hope stood with her daughter. The girl watched the stars blur as they entered faster than light travel. "Are we going to die, Mother?" asked. Put her arm around her daughter. "We are all going to die someday," she said. "But not today, and not tomorrow, and not for a long, long time if I have anything to say about it." What is out there, in the dead expanse? Looked at the stars ahead. They were different now. Older, colder, but still beautiful. "I do not know," she admitted. "No one knows, but that is what makes us human. We go into the unknown. We find out what is there, and we make it ours." Behind them, the galaxy they had known began to fade. Ahead, the Shroud Nebula waited like a wall of purple and black clouds. Beyond it lay the dead expanse. Beyond it lay their future. Whatever that future would be. 3,000 years passed. The galaxy forgot about humanity. At first, there were rumors. Some said the human fleet had been destroyed within days of entering the dead expanse. Others said they had found a hidden paradise and chose to stay. A few whispered that they had encountered something terrible in the darkness, something that had consumed them whole. But as decades turned to centuries and centuries turned too, even the rumors faded. The conquered that had exiled humanity did not last. It broke apart 200 years after the exile, torn apart by the same fear and greed that had driven them to cast out the humans. The Dominion grew powerful and cruel. The hegemony expanded through war. A dozen smaller empires rose and fell. The galaxy burned with conflict. On a small monitoring station at the edge of known space, a young technician named stared at his screens with tired eyes. The station was old and forgotten. It had been built 3,000 years ago to watch the Shroud Nebula, to make sure nothing came back from the dead expanse. But nothing ever came. Nothing ever would. Everyone knew that. Was 23 years old. He had taken this job because it was quiet and paid well. He spent most of his shifts reading old books and dreaming of better places. The screens in front of him showed the same thing they always showed: stars, empty space, the purple wall of the Shroud Nebula in the distance, nothing interesting. Then one night something changed. It was small at first, a flicker on the long-range sensors, an energy reading that should not have been there. Sat up and adjusted his equipment. The reading disappeared. He shook his head and decided he had imagined it. But the next night it came back, stronger this time, and the night after that stronger still. He called his supervisor Commander. She was an older woman who had served on the station for 15 years. She looked at his readings and frowned. "Sensor ghost," she said. "The equipment is old, it sees things that are not there." "But Commander, the readings are consistent. They appear at the same time every night. They are growing stronger. If they were just ghosts, they would be random." Shook her head. "There is nothing out there. The dead expanse is exactly what its name says. Dead. Nothing survives there, nothing ever has, nothing ever will." But could not let it go. Night after night he watched the screens. Night after night the energy readings grew stronger. He began to record them, to chart their patterns. After 3 weeks he had enough data to make a report. The energy signatures were not random. They were organized. They moved in formation. They were approaching the boundary of the Shroud Nebula. He sent his report to Central Command. He expected excitement. He expected questions. He expected something. What he got was silence. After 2 weeks, a single message came back. It told him to forget what he had seen. It told him to delete his recordings. It told him that the Dominion was preparing for war with the hegemony, and all resources were needed for the coming conflict. The dead expanse was not a priority. It never had been. It never would be. Read the message 3 times. Then he looked at his screens. The energy signatures were brighter now, closer. They no longer flickered. They blazed like small suns against the darkness of the shroud. He did not delete his recordings. 3 weeks later, was eating his dinner alone in the station cafeteria when the alarms began to scream. He dropped his food and ran to the control room. Commander was already there, staring at the main screen with wide eyes. Something was coming through the Shroud Nebula. The shroud was supposed to be impassable. Its energy storms could tear apart the largest ships. Its gravity wells could crush anything that got too close. No one had ever crossed it from the other side. No one had ever tried. But now a ship was pushing through, and it was not being destroyed. It was not being slowed. It was cutting through the shroud like a knife through water. Watched with his heart pounding as the ship emerged into known space. It was 5 kilometers long. Its hull was black, so black that it seemed to drink in the light around it. Strange patterns covered its surface, patterns that hurt to look at, patterns that seemed to move even when the ship was still. And on its bow, written in letters that stretched 1/2 kilometer, was a single word: "Return." "What is it?" whispered. Stared at the word. It was written in a language he did not recognize, but something deep inside him, something old and forgotten, knew what it said. He had learned about this language in school long ago. It had been a footnote in a history book, a dead language from a dead species. "Human," he said. "The word is human. It says return in human language." Turned to him with shock on her face. "That is impossible. The humans are dead. They have been dead for 3,000 years. But even as she spoke, more ships began to emerge from the shroud. 10, then 100, then 1,000. They poured out of the nebula like a river breaking through a dam. Each ship was different in size and shape, but all of them carried that same black hull, those same strange patterns. Counted them as they came. He stopped counting at 10,000. The ships did not fire. They did not approach the station. They simply arranged themselves in a vast formation and waited. Their presence alone was a message. We are here. We are many. We are patient. Commander's hands were shaking as she reached for the communication console. I need to contact Central Command. They need to know. Everyone needs to know. Nodded, but he could not look away from the fleet. 3,000 years ago, his ancestors had sent 1.6 million humans into the dead expanse to die. Now, something had come back. Something vast. Something powerful. Something that had turned the death sentence into a transformation. He thought about the word on the lead ship. Return, not revenge, not invasion, return. Like a child coming home after a long journey, like a traveler returning from distant lands. But what had they become during those 3,000 years? What had the dead expanse made of them? The answer came sooner than he expected. The lead ship began to broadcast. Its signal was powerful enough to reach every corner of the galaxy. Every communication system, every broadcast station, every personal device picked up the message. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds stopped what they were doing and listened. A woman's voice spoke. It was calm and clear. It carried no anger, no threat. It was simply a statement of fact. This is Admiral of the Human Return Fleet. 3,000 years ago you sent us to die. We did not die, we survived, we grew, we became something new, and now we have come back, not for revenge, not for war, but because the galaxy needs us, whether it knows it or not. The message ended, the fleet waited. Sat down slowly in his chair. His legs were weak. His mind was spinning. Everything he had ever believed about the universe had just been turned upside down. The humans were back, and the galaxy would never be the same. The galaxy's response to humanity's return was chaos. On 100 worlds, leaders gathered in emergency meetings. On 1,000 ships, weapons were armed and aimed at the newcomers. On 1,000,000 screens, the image of the human fleet was shown again and again. 10,000 ships, each one larger and more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They sat at the edge of known space like a wall of black metal and unknown power. Admiral stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Remembrance. She was 63 years old, with short hair and eyes that had seen things no other living being could imagine. Behind her stood her command crew, men and women whose ancestors had crossed the shroud 3,000 years ago. They were calm. They had prepared for this moment their entire lives. "The fleet is moving to intercept," reported her tactical officer, a young man named. "They are arming their primary weapons." Nodded, she had expected this. They had always believed that power was the only language worth speaking. They could not imagine any other way. "How many ships?" she asked. 800, all capital class. They are the largest fleet in this region of space. Looked at the display showing the approaching ships. They were impressive by the standards of the galaxy. Massive vessels bristling with weapons, each one capable of destroying a small moon. 3,000 years ago, they would have terrified humanity. Now they were nothing. "Open a channel to the flagship," she ordered. The screen flickered, and the face of a commander appeared. His stone-like skin was flushed with anger, and his blue eyes blazed with hatred. "Human vessels, you are in violation of galactic law. You were exiled from this space. Your presence here is an act of war. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Smiled slightly. "Commander, I understand your concern, but I must correct you on one point. We were not exiled from this space. We were exiled to the dead expanse. No law was ever written about what would happen if we survived and returned, because no one ever imagined we would." The commander's face twisted with rage. "Do not play word games with me, human. You have no place here. You have no rights here. You are nothing but ghosts from a forgotten past." "Perhaps," said calmly, "but ghosts can be quite persistent. I am transmitting a message to all species in this region. I suggest you listen before you do something you cannot take back." She cut the channel and turned to her communications officer. "Begin the broadcast." Her voice went out across the galaxy once more. This time, she did not simply announce their return. She explained it. 3,000 years ago, You sent us to the dead expanse because you feared what we might become. You were right to fear, but not for the reasons you imagined." She paused to let her words sink in. The dead expanse was not empty. It was full of challenges that would have killed any other species. Planets where the air was poison, stars that spat radiation like weapons, creatures that existed between dimensions, neither fully real nor fully imaginary. The remnants of civilizations that died before your ancestors were born. On the bridge, her crew watched her with pride. They knew this story. They had lived it. "We did not simply survive these challenges. We learned from them. We adapted to them. We took the poison worlds and made them gardens. We took the radiation and turned it into power. We met the beings between dimensions and learned their secrets. We found the ruins of the old ones and inherited their knowledge." The fleet was still approaching, watched them on the tactical display, but did not stop her broadcast. "We are not here for revenge. Revenge is for those who were harmed and wish to harm in return. We were not harmed. We were given a gift, the hardest gift imaginable. We were given nothing and we made everything." She took a deep breath. "We are here because your galaxy is dying. Your wars have damaged the fabric of spacetime itself. The weapons you use tear holes in reality. If this continues, the damage will become permanent. In 400 years, the cascade will reach a point where nothing can stop it. Everything will unravel. Every star, every planet, every living being will cease to exist." The commander's face appeared on the screen again, but this time his expression was different. He was no longer angry. He was afraid. "You are lying," he said, but his voice trembled. "I am not," replied. "We have the technology to detect the damage. We have the knowledge to understand it, and we have the power to stop it, but only if the wars end. Only if the galaxy learns to work together instead of tear itself apart." The fleet opened fire. Their weapons were the most powerful in the known galaxy. Energy beams that could slice through mountains. Missiles that carried enough explosive force to shatter continents. They fired everything they had at the Remembrance. The crew on the bridge did not move. They did not flinch. They simply watched. The weapons struck the Remembrance's hull and stopped. Not exploded. Not deflected. Stopped. The energy dissipated across the black surface like ripples on a pond. The missiles simply ceased to exist, their matter converted into harmless light. The fleet stopped firing. There was nothing else they could do. Looked at the display showing the enemy ships. She could destroy them all with a single command. Her weapons could erase them from existence as easily as breathing, but she did not give that command. "We expected this," she said softly into the open channel. "We planned for it, we forgive it." Silence fell across the galaxy. Every being who had been watching, every leader who had been plotting, every soldier who had been ready to fight, they all waited to see what would happen next. Continued. "We have not come to conquer, we have not come to rule, we have come to help. We have technology that can heal your wounded worlds, medicine that can cure your plagues, knowledge that can solve problems you have struggled with for, and we offer all of it freely." On the flagship, the commander stared at his screens in shock. His weapons had done nothing. His fleet was powerless, and yet the humans were offering help. It made no sense to him. In his world, power meant domination. Victory meant conquest. The idea of having absolute power and using it to give rather than take was something he could not understand. But others could. Across the galaxy, messages began to arrive at the Remembrance. Small species who had been crushed by the great empires, worlds that had been forgotten and abandoned, peoples who had given up hope long ago. They reached out to humanity with questions, with pleas, with simple words of welcome. Read each message with tears in her eyes. 3,000 years. 3,000 years of struggle and sacrifice and hope. And now, finally, they were home. Not the home they had left. Not the home they had been. But a home they would build together with anyone who was willing to try. She turned to her crew and smiled. Signal the fleet. Begin humanitarian operations. We have a galaxy to heal. In the weeks that followed humanity's return, the galaxy learned what 3,000 years in the dead expanse had created. Captain stood in the great hall of the hegemony, surrounded by beings who had once called humanity a weed to be pulled from the garden. They were large and powerful, covered in rust-colored fur, with teeth like knives and claws like blades. Their warriors had conquered dozens of worlds. Their name was spoken with fear across the galaxy. But was not afraid. He was 35 years old, tall and lean, with the calm eyes of someone who had seen the edge of reality and returned. Behind him stood a small team of human specialists, each carrying cases filled with gifts. The High Council sat on thrones made of bone. Their leader, a massive warrior named, stared down at the human with suspicion and curiosity. "You come to us with empty hands raised," said. His voice was deep like rolling thunder. "Yet your ships could destroy our entire fleet without effort. What game do you play, human?" Smiled gently. "No game, High Lord, only an offer." He gestured to his specialists, who opened their cases. Inside were small devices, glowing crystals and containers of strange liquid. "These are cures for 3 plagues that have killed millions of your people over the past century. The Yellow Death, the Bone Rot, the Sleeping Madness. Our medical technology can eliminate them within a year." The council members shifted in their thrones. The Yellow Death alone had killed more of their people than all their wars combined. "And these," continued, pointing to another case, "are seeds. They will grow in any soil, produce food in any climate, and restore land that has been damaged by war or pollution. Your western provinces have been dying for generations. These can bring them back to life." Leaned forward. "And what is the price? Do not tell me there is no price. Everything has a price." Looked up at the massive warrior without fear. "The price is nothing. These are gifts. You are neighbors we have not yet met." The hall fell silent. They did not understand gifts. Their entire culture was built on trade and conquest. You took what you wanted, or you paid what you could not avoid paying. The idea of giving something valuable without expecting anything in return was alien to them. "This is a trick," said one of the council members. "They want something, they must want something." Shook his head. "We want only one thing, and it is not something you need to give us. We want the wars to stop. We want the galaxy to heal. We want to prevent the cascade that will destroy everything in 400 years. These gifts are not payment for your help. They are given because you need them, and we have them to give." He paused. "What you do with them is your choice. You can use the medicine to save your people, or you can throw it away. You can plant the seeds, or you can burn them. We will not force you to accept our help. We will only offer it." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On the ocean world of, Lieutenant led a team of engineers who helped rebuild cities that had been destroyed by a century of civil war. The people were small and gentle, with blue-green skin and large, sad eyes. They had forgotten what peace looked like. Their children had been born in shelters and grown up knowing only fear. Worked alongside them, helping to clear rubble and construct new homes. She did not give orders. She did not take charge. She simply worked side by side with beings who had every reason to hate her species. One evening, a young girl approached her. The girl was thin and dirty, with scars on her arms from old wounds. "Why do you help us?" the girl asked. "You do not know us, we have nothing to give you." Knelt down to meet the girl's eyes. "When my ancestors were sent to the dead expanse, they had nothing. No home, no resources, no hope, but they survived because they helped each other. They learned that the only way to live in a universe that does not care about you is to care about each other." She smiled. "You do not need to give us anything. We help because helping is what we do. It is who we became." The girl stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. Not everyone welcomed humanity's return. The Dominion, humiliated by their failed attack, closed their borders and refused all contact. Their leaders declared that humanity was a threat, that their gifts were poison, that their help was a trap. They built weapons and prepared for a war that humanity would not fight. Other groups also rejected the newcomers. Some called humanity unnatural, claiming that no species could survive the dead expanse without becoming something wrong and twisted. Others simply could not believe that anyone would give without wanting to take. Their entire understanding of the universe was built on selfishness and fear. Kindness without conditions was something they could not process. But these voices grew quieter as time passed. On world after world, humanity's gifts proved real. Plagues were cured, famines were ended, damaged ecosystems began to heal. The impossible promises became everyday reality. And slowly, the galaxy began to change. Admiral met with leaders from dozens of species. She never demanded, she never threatened. She simply explained what humanity had learned during their exile. "We spent 3,000 years in the dark," she told a gathering of diplomats on the neutral world of. "We faced challenges that should have destroyed us, and we learned something that you have forgotten." The diplomats listened in silence. "We learned that survival is not about being the strongest or the fastest or the most ruthless. It is about working together, about helping each other, about building instead of destroying. The species that cast us out believed that power meant dominance. They were wrong. Power means the ability to choose, and we choose to help." She looked around the room at beings from a dozen different worlds, species that had been enemies for centuries. "You can make the same choice. You can stop the wars. You can heal the damage. You can build a future where your children do not wake up afraid. We cannot force you to do this. We can only show you that it is possible." The cascade that threatened to destroy spacetime was real. Humanity's scientists had detected it centuries ago. They had developed technology to measure it, to track it, to predict its spread. And they shared this technology freely. For the first time, the galaxy saw the damage it had done to itself, the scars left by of war, the cracks in reality caused by weapons too powerful to control, the slow unraveling that would eventually consume everything. It was terrifying, but it was also a reason to hope, because now they knew, and knowing meant they could act. Wrote in her personal log, 3,000 years ago they sent us away because they feared what we might become. Now they are beginning to understand. We became exactly what they feared. We became those who help. We became those who heal. We became those who build. And that terrifies them more than any weapon ever could. She looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there they were hiding behind their walls, afraid of kindness they could not understand. Somewhere out there, wars still burned and hatred still flourished. But here, on this small blue-green world, children were playing in streets that had been battlefields a month ago. Families were eating food grown from seeds that should not have existed. People were smiling. It was not much, not compared to the size of the galaxy, not compared to the work that still needed to be done. But it was a start, and humanity had learned long ago that everything great begins with a small start. 10 years after humanity's return, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The wars had not ended completely. Hatred that had burned for could not be erased in a decade, but they had slowed. Worlds that had been locked in endless conflict began to talk instead of fight. Borders that had been walls became doorways. Old enemies sat together and remembered that they had not always been enemies. Director stood at the center of the new Galactic Council, a place that had not existed 10 years ago. She was 50 years old, with calm eyes and patient hands. She had spent her entire adult life rebuilding what war had destroyed. Now she watched as representatives from 70 different species gathered in a hall built specifically for this moment. The old Concord had been a tribunal of judges, looking down from high thrones to deliver verdicts. This new council was a circle, No one sat higher than anyone else. No one's voice was worth more than any other's. Humanity had designed it this way on purpose. "We are gathered here to mark the anniversary of the return," said. Her voice carried across the hall without effort. "But this day does not belong to humanity. It belongs to all of us, to everyone who chose hope over fear, to everyone who chose to build instead of destroy." She looked around the circle at faces that would have been unimaginable a decade ago. The once proud conquerors now sat beside the small gentle they had once terrorized. The scattered remnants of a dozen species that had nearly been wiped out by war now had their own seats, their own voices. Even a single representative from the Dominion sat among them, a young woman who had her government to come. "10 years ago, many of you feared us," continued. "You looked at our ships and saw weapons. You looked at our technology and saw threats. You could not understand why anyone would give without taking, why anyone would help without demanding payment." She smiled gently. "But you learned, just as we learned in the dead expanse. You learned that the universe is vast and cold and does not care about any of us. And you learned that the only answer to that coldness is warmth. The only answer to that vastness is connection. The only answer to that indifference is love." Outside the council hall, the work of rebuilding continued. Human engineers worked alongside builders to construct bridges between worlds that had been enemies for centuries. Human doctors shared knowledge with healers from 100 different species, learning as much as they taught. Human teachers sat with children who had never known peace and showed them that another way was possible. On the edge of known space, Admiral stood on the observation deck of the Remembrance, looking out at the Shroud Nebula. She was 73 now, her hair completely white, her face lined with age and experience. But her eyes were still sharp, still filled with the determination that had carried humanity through 3,000 years of exile. Her granddaughter stood beside her. The young woman was 25 years old, born after the return, part of a generation that had never known the dead expanse. But she had been raised on its stories. She knew what her ancestors had endured. She knew what they had become. "Do you ever wish we had come back angry?" asked. "That we had made them pay for what they did to us?" Considered the question carefully. She had asked herself the same thing many times over the years. "When I was young, I did," she admitted. "When I saw the recordings of the trial, when I read the words they used to condemn us, when I learned how they expected us to die and did not care, I wanted revenge. I burned with it." She turned to look at her granddaughter. "But then I saw what revenge had done to the galaxy. I saw worlds destroyed by hatred that no one could remember the cause of. I saw children born into wars that had lasted longer than their species had existed. I saw how revenge bred more revenge, how hatred bred more hatred, until there was nothing left but ashes." She looked back at the stars. "We could have come back as conquerors. We had the power. We could have crushed every species that had ever looked down on us, burned every world that had cheered when we were exiled, erased every trace of those who had wished us dead." She paused. "But then we would have become exactly what they feared. We would have proved them right. And everything our ancestors had suffered, everything they had built, everything they had become, would have meant nothing." Nodded slowly. "So we came back as healers instead." "Yes, we came back as the thing no one expected, the thing no one could defend against. We came back with open hands and willing hearts, and that terrified them more than any weapon ever could." The galaxy was still healing. The cascade that had threatened to unravel spacetime was being reversed, slowly but surely. Humanity's scientists worked with the minds of every species to repair the damage. It would take centuries, but time was something they had learned to be patient with. Not everyone had been saved. The Dominion still hid behind its walls, still taught its children to fear and hate. Other groups still clung to the old ways, still believed that power meant destruction. Some wounds were too deep to heal in a single generation. But the children were learning. All across the galaxy, young beings grew up in a universe where helping others was normal, where cooperation was expected, where kindness was not weakness but strength. Now a senior leader in the humanitarian corps, often visited the world of where she had worked during those first difficult years. The children she had helped rebuild were adults now. They had their own children, and they told stories about the strange humans who had come from the darkness and brought light. On the anniversary of the return, a ceremony was held at the edge of the Shroud Nebula. Ships from every human world gathered there, just as their ancestors' ships had gathered 3,000 years before. But this time, they were not alone. Ships from dozens of other species joined them, forming a vast fleet that stretched across the darkness. Admiral, frail but still commanding, addressed them all. 3,000 years ago, we were sent here to die. We crossed that nebula with nothing but our ships and our determination. We entered the dead expanse expecting to find death. Instead, we found something else. We found ourselves. She looked out at the assembled fleet, at the representatives from species that had once considered humanity a pest to be eliminated. They cast us out because they feared what we might become. They were right to fear, but not for the reasons they imagined. We did not become conquerors. We did not become destroyers. We did not become the monsters they expected. Her voice grew stronger. We became something far more terrifying to those who rule through power alone. We became those who help. We became those who heal. We became those who build. And there is nothing in this universe more terrifying to tyrants than a hand extended in genuine friendship. The fleet activated their drives together. Light bloomed across the shroud, not the light of weapons but of beacons, guides for any lost traveler, promises written in. Director watched from the council hall on a distant world. Lieutenant watched from a garden that had once been a battlefield. Captain watched from a world that had become a center of healing. Millions of humans and billions of others watched from 1,000 different places. They watched as light spread across the darkness. They watched as hope became visible. They watched as the galaxy took another step toward becoming something new. The road ahead was long. Centuries of work still remained. Old hatreds would flare up again. New challenges would arise. Nothing was guaranteed. Nothing was certain. But humanity had learned something important in the dead expanse. They had learned that nothing worth having comes easily. They had learned that the hardest battles are not fought with weapons, but with patience. They had learned that the greatest victory is not conquering your enemies, but turning them into friends. And they had learned that the darkness is never as empty as it seems, that even in the deepest void, there is always room for light. The beacons burned across the shroud, the galaxy watched, and somewhere in the endless reaches of space, a new dawn was beginning. Not just for humanity, for everyone.